Hello there, everyone. How you doing today? I hope you're all well. Today we're reading a bunch of stories from r/askreddit. The question of the name of the game today is Police Officers of Reddit. Who is the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? If you have some examples of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Who knows, maybe I'll read them on my channel someday. Anyway, let's get started. I worked with one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police he was off his medication. The police would arrest him, but then send him to a mental ward, with papers instructing the ward to release the police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the persons attending the desk with the file cabinet to leave said cabinet. When the psych evaluators decided he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. My favorite was the guy who stole a post office mailbox off the street, repainted it, then put it next to the night deposits box at a bank, and hung an out of order sign at the deposit box. All the businesses came along and dropped their deposits in the mailbox. A guy I went to high school with had been stealing from Walmart in a pretty clever way. He would grab video games, MP3 players, beer, and so on, and just wait, sometimes 5 hours until they emptied the trash can in the back dumpster, and hop in to get his items. Once he took a cardboard box from a display inside, filled it with video games, a PS3, and extra controllers. He grabbed some tape and pens and drew over the box and taped it up to make it look used and tossed it in. An hour later, he had a whole new PS3 and a stack of games. I'm not a cop, but I worked crime scene. This guy had attached a GPS to the bottom of people's cars who owned houses he wanted to rob. He did it to ensure they wouldn't be showing up while he was ransacking the place. I heard about one person that pulled off a shoplifting scam at a large, popular, and well-known US retail store. They walked in with some cheap nylon product to get one of those "I walked in with this" stickers they used to put on returning merchandise. The sticker easily peeled off the product undamaged. They walked to the electronics department, grabbed an expensive box off the shelf, and went to customer service. They placed the sticker on the big box and asked if they could return the item without a receipt. Unfortunately, no, not without the original receipt. Aw, dang it. And they walk out. Customer service even gave the doorman the thumbs up, having just interacted with the customer. This took place before widespread inventory controls and cameras were absolutely everywhere. I feel like I would remember what I had and hadn't recently put a sticker on, but perhaps I wouldn't be getting paid enough to worry too much about it, so to each their own. This was in the late 90s to early thousands. A guy in my dorm came to my school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, then literally never, ever went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story, and got put on probation for a semester. So he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out and didn't care. He made something on the order of $150,000 in return for about $8,000 in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but the short run, it seemed fairly genius. to effectively use federal loans to start your drug business. Working in a home improvement store when I was younger, this guy came in, went to the snowblowers, took one, and went to the return desk. Said he wanted to return it but had no receipt. They told him, "You need a receipt," so he says, "Okay, I'll be back," and wheels it off to the car through the door. He did this the first few times, apparently. Couple places even helped him load it back into his car. I had a guy with that big expensive bedding sets at Sears back 20 years ago. He came up the escalator empty-handed, walked into the first aisle, came out carrying this set. He said he wanted to return it. I said I needed a receipt, and when I asked why, I explained, well, sometimes we have issues with people coming up here, taking stuff off the shelves and trying to return it. He got a bit squirrely, looked around kinda panicked, and left with it. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them and sprinted out the door. Most of them are really stupid. So this guy isn't a criminal mastermind or anything like that. But here goes. He wanted to rob a jewelry store on our city's main street. So he found out that a flat beside the jeweler's was empty and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. A massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on the cameras. Thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait till the morning to get a new one installed, or that rewired, because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that and the police leaving, he tore down the wall. He had already been working on this, apparently. He robbed the place, taking his sweet-ass time. He escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours, until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole, which had a serial number on it, and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good plot, though. There's a golf course country club near my town that has a PGA tournament scheduled in the next couple years. They have a guy repeatedly breaking in overnight and just lounging around and eating food, all on the cameras. The dub refuses to report it so they don't hurt their chances of the tournament coming. That's like some kind of movie comedy plot. Chaotic neutral. Worked at a jail. After getting off work, I watched the next inmate, who was homeless, being released. He walked over to a patrol car, looked me in the eye, and elbowed the window in. He was walked back to the entrance and rebooked in. It was the middle of January, and he didn't want to get too cold. To the people talking about can't break car windows, that's true. Also, it depends on the car. The patrol car they used was specifically an old model, used more for the perimeter of the jail unless the other patrol cars were in the shop. Those windows have been replaced so many times, I don't know if it's the same material or what. A French thief who spent 10 years in prison becomes a comedian when he got out. One of his stories was, finds a building, goes in, chooses a floor, and transforms the exit door into an extra apartment. Puts the apartment number, a fake lock on it, welcome rug, and so on. He puts an iPhone for sale. The person comes to it, he opens the door in a shower robe and says, "Give me 1 second, I'm just going to count the money," and poof, he's gone from the exit stairs. Who gives the money first without ever seeing the iPhone? A friend of my brother moved to Israel where for a period of time it was and is acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. "Costco? What's Costco?" "It's the state I'm from." "That sounds made up." "There are a lot of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas?" "How about Idaho?" "I guess not." "Well, I'm from the small state of Costco." The officer didn't have a response and it wound up writing this ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. The friend framed the ticket and still has it laying on the wall. One guy would print barcodes, bring them into Home Depot, and stick them on merchandise in the $100 range. When scanned, the items came around the $10 range. Putting random barcodes on things isn't really illegal and super hard to notice. Guy 2 would come in an hour later and buy the underpriced stuff. Completely plausible deniability. They would sell the stuff on eBay. Only reason they got caught is because the guy with the barcode printer software cut the second guy out of the operation. So Guy 2 stole a bunch of barcodes, put them on the merchandise, and paid for it immediately afterwards. He then proceeded to rat on Guy 1 and spilled the beans that they had been doing this on a weekly basis for 4 years. Because we could only pin one guy the case on him, the burglary was dropped down to a petty theft, and he walked away with a few days in county and a small fine. Dude probably took Home Depot for tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. With that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything he didn't have to. Alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two, and then takes him about 3 to 4 minutes to call us into them, giving him a good 5-minute head start, so he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched to it. He clearly scoped out the area before doing his deed too. Smart dude. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered superbike, but knew he couldn't ever afford it. So what he did was take a drive out to London and scouted about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a slide hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage, and completely strips it so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up and he explains that he just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down his name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had chased the bike as a write-off and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame wasn't found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it, or they should throw it away. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back, repaints it, and then puts it all back together and re-registers it as a Q register, stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I? I'm not a copper, but this was pretty smart. I used to run bars at a number of venues around the north of England, one of which was Chester Racecourse. Usually we just have to keep an eye out for scousers trying to nick drinks or steal in without paying. And us being so close to Liverpool, there was a fair amount of security on site. You could tell them, as they'd be suited, booted, a high-visibility waistcoat on, and usually carrying a radio. Now, there were a dozen or so bars dotted around the courses, and you can imagine the amount of money that was taken from 100,000 or so punters, drinking steadily from 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. So every hour or so, the security would go round the bars to turn in and take all the high-denomination notes from each till and stick them in the safe in the main building. So I stood there one day, pulling pints, doing the barman thing. The security blokes have been round a few times, and it's getting steadily busier. Then one bloke shows up in his own high visibility and on radio in his hand. Does the till, leaving the usual receipt so we can balance up at the end of the meeting. A bit early, I think, but hey-ho, I've been plenty to do. Then 10 minutes or so later, 2 more blokes show up, dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that just yet." What, mate? We're the only two doing this duty today. Cue a rapid fire and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. Matey boy, who'd done the till before, used to work there apparently, so he knew the drill, and he'd been watching the guards and knew just when to time it, and what order they were going round the bars in. Apparently he got round 9 or 10 before he decided not to push his luck any further, and walked out with about 80 grand, we heard later. Just took the high visibility, dumped that, and the radio, and he's just one more guy in a suit in the crowd of thousands. They were a little bit stricter on the procedure after that, if I'm being honest. That's the end of today's video. If you enjoyed today's stories, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below with your own stories or thoughts on the stories, and I will see you all next time. Hasta la pasta.